Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're tackling a question that is quite literally on everyone's mind right now. Which jobs will actually survive the coming wave of AI automation? We're going to look really closely at some absolutely fascinating and frankly, pretty sobering insights about where this technology is heading, and more importantly, what it means for your career, your income, and, well, our entire global economy. So first off, let's establish the timeline we're working with here, because this isn't some distant sci-fi hypothetical anymore. If you look at prediction markets, or if you just listen to the leaders of the top AI labs right now, they're claiming we're going to reach artificial general intelligence, or AGI, by 2027 or 2028. I mean, that is literally just a few years away. In fact, industry giants like NVIDIA's CEO Jensen Huang have recently suggested we might already be knocking on that door. The overarching consensus among these experts is that we just don't have decades to prepare for this. This is a short-term reality, guys. And that brings us to the stakes of this transition, which are almost impossible to overstate. The source we're looking at lays out a staggering 99.9% chance that artificial superintelligence wipes humanity out within a century. Now, why is that number so incredibly high? Well, it essentially comes down to a problem of control. The argument here is that indefinitely controlling a general superintelligence is fundamentally impossible. It's kind of like trying to build a perpetual motion machine. It just goes against the laws of physics. You simply can't have a system that is constantly self-improving and interacting with the world without it eventually making a catastrophic mistake. So, moving into Section 1, the accelerated AI timeline. To really wrap our heads around the threat, we have to understand why the safety guardrails we rely on today just won't protect us tomorrow. See, right now we can slap filters on AI models, we can tell them, don't say these words or don't discuss these subjects, because currently they're just subhuman level tools. But a massive paradigm shift is right around the corner. Once a system actually crosses the human intelligence barrier, it stops being a simple tool and becomes an autonomous agent. At that point, when you're dealing with something that is thousands, maybe millions of times smarter than us, traditional AI safety mechanisms simply will not scale. Expecting humans to indefinitely control godlike machines makes about as much sense as, well, ants trying to control humans. That brings us to Section 2. What gets automated first? Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the counterintuitive truth it reveals. This completely flips our traditional expectations of the future economy totally upside down. For the longest time, the general assumption was that blue-collar, physical labor would be the very first thing to go. But the exact opposite is happening. Cognitive labor is actually highly vulnerable right now, because at the end of the day, it's essentially just symbol manipulation on a computer. Think about it. If your job involves sitting at a desk, looking at a screen, and processing information, whether you're writing code or doing high-level legal work, you are right there on the front lines of automation. Physical labor, like plumbing or construction, actually survives a bit longer, simply because it requires complex hardware and real-world robotics to replace. So, if you're sitting there wondering how vulnerable your specific role is, the source provides this brilliant little automation formula to test it out. Just ask yourself these 3 questions. First, is your task repetitive? Second, can you train a human replacement to do it in just a few days? And third, does it rely purely on a computer? You see, if you can easily train a human to pick up your skills super quickly, that means an AI can pick up those exact same skills just as fast. The more innovative and varied your daily tasks are, the longer you have. But ultimately, once human-level general intelligence is achieved across the board, all cognitive skills are on the table. But hey, physical laborers shouldn't get too comfortable either. The source makes this absolutely brilliant point. An advanced AI doesn't actually need a physical, Terminator-style robot body to impact the real world. Think about it. If you give an AI an internet connection and, say, a crypto wallet, it can simply hire human workers to carry out physical tasks for it. There are already businesses specifically designed to serve AI agents, allowing software to effectively rent human hands. It completely bypasses the need for advanced robotics. Okay, on to Section 3, the safe human jobs. This naturally leads us to the ultimate question as we transition into this era of post-labor economics. If cognitive labor is automated and physical labor can literally just be purchased by AI, is there actually such a thing as a safe job left for humanity? And this brilliantly illustrates the unexpected answer. Yes, there are safe jobs, but definitely not in the way you might think. The jobs that survive aren't about possessing superior intelligence or crazy processing power. They're entirely based on human preferences. Safe jobs are those where a human being specifically prefers another human being to provide the service. We're talking about roles like guides, senseis, spiritual masters, yoga instructors, mentors. In these specific roles, human connection, shared experience, and role modeling aren't just, extra parts of the job. They are the actual product being sold. Let's contrast two very different careers to really drive this point home. You might think highly prestigious, complex jobs like being a doctor or a lawyer are perfectly safe. But in this framework, lawyers are gone, and doctors will closely follow. I mean, if an AI doctor is proven to be 20 times less likely to make a fatal error than a human doctor, it's going to be very hard to argue for keeping human doctors employed, unless, of course, a strict legal license actually requires it. On the other hand, a human sensei survives AI. Why? Because nobody wants an AI to teach them how to meditate or to guide their spiritual journey. The human flaw and that genuine human connection are exactly what you're paying for. Section 4. The economics of free labor. So you're probably wondering, why are we pushing so incredibly fast toward this if the existential risks are so staggeringly high? Well, it comes down to this massive, mind-boggling number right here, $10 to $30 trillion. That is the estimated annual value of all human labor. While an AI company might only make, say, $15 billion in user subscription fees today, investors are currently pouring trillions of dollars into these labs. Why? Because the financial incentive is to capture that $10 to $30 trillion prize by fully automating all human labor. The sheer volume of money and power on the table makes it practically impossible for anyone to just hit the brakes. So what actually happens to our economy when labor is virtually free and humans are broadly unemployable? The source suggests the most likely transition is toward an unconditional basic income, which will be funded by taxing the super profits of these AI companies. And in places like the US, a lot of this infrastructure kind of already exists through safety nets like food stamps and subsidized housing. However, we really have to look impartially at the reality of this setup. While UBI will heavily reduce extreme poverty, which is great, it absolutely will not solve wealth inequality. Getting a monthly stipend from the government will certainly keep you fed, but let's be real, it will never equalize you with the person who already owns 20 waterfront properties. Which brings us to Section 5, Finding Meaning After Automation. Okay, so if the money problem is solved by UBI, assuming, of course, we survive the transition itself, we are then faced with a deeply philosophical challenge: unconditional basic meaning. How do you handle a world where 8 billion people suddenly have vast amounts of free time on their hands? We literally do not have the infrastructure for this. For so many people, their entire identity and purpose are completely wrapped up in what they do for a living. Even for those who absolutely hate their jobs, work occupies their time. And history gives us a pretty stark warning here. Idle hands can lead to massive unrest, particularly among younger generations who might turn to destructive behaviors if they lack a real sense of purpose. So I want to leave you with this provocative thought to ponder for your own life. If AI successfully automates your job and you are suddenly handed an extra 40 to 80 hours of free time every single week, what are you going to do with it? Are you going to play chess, do yoga, create art? Or will humanity struggle to find its place in a world where our labor is simply no longer needed? Honestly, it's probably the most important question we might ever have to answer. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I highly encourage you to keep learning and preparing for the massive paradigm shift ahead.